Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Looks like we've got a good crowd today and a lot of people still joining the room. We'll be getting started here shortly, but first I want to call your attention to a few things. First, we're going to be referring to the cyber balance sheet report throughout the webinar today. I suspect that most of you have downloaded a copy, but if you haven't, I've pinned a copy of the report to the handout section of the GoToWebinar dashboard. Our panelists will also be answering your questions, as well as those that came in advance through social media. We've reserved a good amount of time toward the end of the webinar to deal with those questions. If you have a question to ask, please do so. Just drop it in the question section of the GoToWebinar dashboard. If it's a question pertaining to a particular slide, feel free to use the hand raise feature through GoToWebinar, and we'll call on you while we're on that slide. All right, let's get started. Our panelists today are Yong-Gon of Focal Point Data Risk and Wade Baker of the Cybersecurity Institute. Yong-Gon is the CEO of Focal Point Data Risk and also serves on the company's board of directors. He spent the past 20 years leading and growing cybersecurity teams and solving emerging security challenges for Fortune 1000 and government clients. Prior to Focal Point, he led the security division of Kratos Security Solutions. He's also a frequent speaker at industry events and a frequently cited expert in print, radio, and TV. And just this week, he was selected as a finalist for E&Y's prestigious Entrepreneur of the Year Award in Florida. Welcome, Yong-Gon, and thanks for joining us. Our other panelist this afternoon is Wade Baker. Wade is a business leader and researcher with a passion for using data to improve cybersecurity decisions, practices, and products. He's the co-founder of the Cybersecurity Institute, a data-driven security research firm. He was also the lead researcher on the recently published Cyber Balance Sheet report. But he's perhaps best known for creating and leading Verizon's annual DBIR series, widely regarded as the gold standard in the industry for understanding threats and prioritizing defenses. Thank you both for speaking with us today. And with that introduction, I'll go ahead and turn over the presentation to Wade to get us started.
Awesome, I appreciate it, Casey, and hello, everyone. Yeah, thanks again for joining, whether it's lunchtime or evening or morning for maybe some of you. I hope this is enjoyable. We've got lots of good things to talk about. I really enjoyed this research project, and especially so because I can honestly say I learned a lot from it. Doing any kind of research and being able to write up those findings and share it is always fun for me, but especially so when there's, I really feel like I took something away from it. So, and I definitely did here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the research, how we did it, the background, that kind of thing, just so you have a sense for what these things are when we start showing a few charts. We're going to talk about what is a cyber balance sheet. This report is the cyber balance sheet. And if you kind of maybe browse through the first few pages, you might be wondering, where's the balance sheet concept? Well, that comes at the end, so we're definitely going to spend some time on that. And like Casey said, we're going to have some Q&A at the end, but we'll try to get to them as best we can through there. But first, I think it's really important to, on one hand, recognize that the date today is May the 4th. And on the other hand, that data risk is not just a modern phenomenon. It is definitely something that was happening, wait for it, a long time ago in a boardroom far, far away. And I think this is an ultimately critical issue that we've got to deal with. There's this beautiful backstory that maybe some of you have lived through something like this. You're a security leader. You've got some decisions to make. You can use your gut. You can let your people battle it out and bring their best opinions and things like that. But at some point in time, you've got to stand before the board and act like you're confident in whatever it is that you're recommending and spending their money on. So this is a pain that many have felt. We knew this going into the report, but I think the report did a good job at discovering what kind of pain, all the different categories and what it looks like and the different ways that people feel it. And that was the really fun thing about this. So Just like we're going to see that CISOs, security leaders, and board members often have differing opinions and different perspectives, which is a really important part of this research. Again, this was the same thing in our beloved Star Wars movie a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So you look at the Emperor here, who I think maybe not so. We can't compare him necessarily to a board member because he seemed to make all the decisions unilaterally. But he is very concerned, right? He recognizes there's a new enemy. This boy, offspring of Anakin Skywalker, and he says he could destroy us. But on the other hand, the admiral, the guy in charge of security for the Empire, very, very confident, perhaps too much so. And in fact, as we see the end of the movie, very much so. He ends up getting blown up in the Death Star when it's destroyed. But look at his quote. What? We can't evacuate. It's our moment of triumph. I think you overestimate their chances. So this back and forth, this differing of perspectives is a very real thing that we deal with today as well. So let's hit the next slide and get into that a little bit. So we really wanted to dig in to those kinds of differences. There's been some research in this area before, either studying cybersecurity at the board level or cybersecurity focused on security leaders and how they measure success and those kinds of things. But what we thought would really make this one pop is that intersection of the two, because these are the two worlds that ultimately have to fund and make decisions and implement security practices for the organization. And we wanted to see, on the one hand, how do security leaders think about this? On the other hand, how do corporate directors? And then really, where do they align and where do they differ? Not because we could hold that up and say, oh, look, there's disagreement. And make a big deal about it, but more importantly, to build a bridge, to start seeing, okay, I get why their perspective is this, I get why their perspective is that. How do we start bringing these two groups together? And that's ultimately the goal here of what we want to do, is bring these two groups together so that they have better mutual understanding, and ultimately the security of their organizations is improved. So we thought about this at the beginning, and we decided on interviews as the best method of getting at this. So you'll see a lot of security research blast out a bunch of survey requests, out there, and they'll get several hundred responses. But surveys, you kind of have to know what you're looking for beforehand so you can design the questions. You can't really get deep answers, and so there's some limitations. There's some advantages, but there are some limitations. And what we really wanted to do here is just listen to people, and let them talk and take notes and not guide them too much in what they would say. So we had some questions. What is the primary value of security? Is an example. And that was it. And we just let them talk. And sometimes that was a very short answer. Sometimes that was a 10-minute answer. And we didn't try to guide or restrict that in any way. And so all of these interviews took kind of a different path, but we tried to cover a similar corpus of questions during those, and took furious notes. And at the end, we have these great quotes that we're able to present and contrast during the report that, from my perspective, I really like the qualitative and quantitative blend of this. So how we went about this, you're going to see some charts in a little bit. And if you can kind of imagine a process where somebody says something, and we read all of these interview transcripts, and we coded those responses into common themes or categories. So we're going to talk about the value of security, and you're going to see that security guidance, business enablement, loss avoidance, and things like that are going to be themes. And basically we said, is there anything in what this person said that aligns with one of those themes? And if yes, then we marked it a 1, and that's how we derived the statistics that you'll see in a little bit. So very interesting method. Again, interviews was a very cool way to do it, because people, some people kind of unloaded a little bit on this, and we're talking 30 to 45-minute conversations here for most of these. So it was a good thing. Let's do next slide and start digging in. All right, so another thing you'll notice about this report is it's organized around balance points. There's 6 main balance points. And the first one is the value of cybersecurity. So there's somewhat of a logical order to these, but really there, again, we had all these questions and these interviews that we conducted, and we just said, man, what seem to be these common points where CISOs and board members either have a difference of opinion, or it seems to be causing pain for either one of those 2 groups. And let's really dig in. So the first one is what is the value of cybersecurity to the business? And this is a very open-ended question. This was a very first question that I asked in the interview. And again, just let people talk. And I thought there was some fascinating stuff in here. So if you look at a lot of these charts, there's going to be CISO answers on the one side in blue here. So for instance, a little over 40% of CISOs or security leaders said that their primary value that they provide to the business was some type of security guidance or awareness. A lot of them said people come to them and say, hey, we want to do this business thing. It's going to require this. Are there any security ramifications? And then CISO starts giving some guidance. Good example of that. On the other side there in the gray is the board. So about 20%, when you ask a board member, what's the primary value of security, they say something that corresponds to security guidance. So, just right there, there's a little bit of difference. Things to note, CISOs, the one most often they would answer was something in the form of security guidance. And in talking to them, I think this had a lot to do with the fact that is sort of the day-to-day how they spend their time, and a lot of the interaction that they have with the board is in and around that, offering suggestions and what we should do, and does this have a does this open the door for risk, and all of those kinds of things. And so really the CISO may feel very much like that's their primary value, because that's the thing that they interact with the most for the board. But then you'll notice you ask the board, and by kind of a large margin, they say data protection, or prevent data breaches, or something in and around that, prevent breaches and disruptions to our data. Over 85% of them say that's your number one job. And I was kind of surprised that CISOs did not mention that more often. But again, I think this has to do with just a lot of, hey, I interact with the board a lot on things that sound like security guidance. And maybe it's just obvious that I'm supposed to protect data, but I'm really trying to raise up what I'm doing to more of a business or strategic level. So, when you just ask them flat out that question, that's their response. But I think this is a critical thing to begin a conversation on in an organization, because if you miss it here, then kind of everything else we're going to talk about starts going off track. If data protection and brand protection truly is the most important thing to the board, well, that means security leaders need to start offering up some evidence as to why that's taken care of. And then sure, maybe track how you're enabling the business and how you're reducing risk and avoiding loss and providing security guidance. But first things first is kind of the takeaway there. Yong-Gon, do you have anything to add on that? I know you've lived in this world quite a long time. Not to say you're old or anything, but
gee, thanks, Wade. Yeah, I think I think part of what we also heard was that in some cases that business enabler category was more aspirational as opposed to reality from the board members' perspective. The main concern was protect our organization from cyber liability. Protect our organization from bad outcomes. That is your job. And so I think that was a key board perspective for security leaders to take away. And in some cases, this first question here really kind of shows the disparity between the different points of view.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point on business enablement being somewhat aspirational. And I really thought about that one a lot, and I got the sense too that I kind of wonder if this is an area where the security, I don't know if I want to say marketing arm has maybe misled some people. In other words, it's been very common to say, hey, you have to make security relevant to the business. You have to make security relevant to the business. And that's a very true statement. It's a very true recommendation. But I think maybe some people hear that to say, well, then I need to do extra things that enable the business. And I think the board maybe would prefer, no, do the things that protect the business and just prove it to me. That's what I mean by, that's what we mean by making security relevant to the business. So, again, it's one of those things that kind of comes out in having a lot of conversations around this. All right, let's do balance point 2. So this one flows right from balance point 1, and in talking to people about what they think is security's biggest value, asking, well, do you find it easy or difficult to convey that value across the business and to the board specifically? And again, you'll notice how things start to diverge here, not contrasting CISOs and board on this one, but this is mainly CISO responses here. CISOs found it fairly easy to convey value when they felt the board had a high level of awareness. So they would make some comment like, oh yeah, our board are former engineers, or they've been in the security realm, they're very security aware. Very easy for me to go in there and talk to them, and I don't have to sort of constantly defend what I'm doing. They get it, makes it my job a lot easier. On the other hand, you can see when you don't have that luxury, that some of them do say, yeah, that's the lack of board awareness really makes it hard. So these kind of factors, imagine the things on the right, board awareness, board support, business enabler, are things that CISOs said either made that job difficult or easy. So board awareness is a big thing that makes it easy. And the one that makes it really, really hard, that kind of sticks out to the right there in red, is the ability to offer some kind of justification for what you're telling the board. So you can imagine how this goes. Hey, we've got these risks, or we need to do these things. I need this budget increase. And the board says, why? And then you're in a tough point, because if you can't offer something that justifies your request or justifies your decision or course of action, that conversation can get a little bit uncomfortable. And so this was definitely a pain point where people were suffering. So we're going to talk about metrics and other ways of that can get you the ability to offer that justification. But I think it's just important for now to realize that these things are very difficult and can make the job a lot more difficult. Now, there's a couple here. I'm just going to call out presentation skills that are balanced. Like, it's pretty even between making it easy or making it hard to convey security's value to the business. And that's kind of interesting. Presentation skills, very soft skill. Doesn't have anything to do with how much you know about security or how much you know about the business. It's just basically how you present those things, how you package your story together. And apparently it makes a big difference. And that may make some people uncomfortable, kind of, what, you mean to tell me that I can do an excellent job securing the organization and do everything I have, really reduce risk, and yet still struggle because I just can't present that as well? And the unfortunate answer is yeah. But the good news there is that there's a lot of things you can do to improve that board level presentation. So let's do next slide. Go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, Wade. On this particular slide, one thing that I find very interesting is offering justification in the board's perspective. I think is a very interesting line as it relates to the previous question around business enablement. I think that security leaders often find it easier to provide justification for security spends when they are business enablers. For example, if I don't get FedRAMP compliant, I can't sell to the federal government. Well, what does that market opportunity look like? Well, that market opportunity is worth several $100 million. And what is our market share on that? 0. And so when you present that as an example, it's easier to provide justification. And so business enablement within that context makes sense. But let's say you want to go deploy network access control, or you want to deploy an identity and access management solution, how do you relate that back? Often that justification comes back to some sort of, well, if we don't do this, it's an audit finding, and the audit committee is really driving it. And trying to figure out how to make something intangible increase the level of risk management within the organization, very, very difficult. And the quote here I think is very telling, in that the main challenge is I could do everything right and we could still have a loss. And I think what needs to happen there is there needs to be a change in conversation, because that board level of awareness, I would say is still very low. And so board members, just even in answering the first question, if your job is data protection or your job is breach prevention, I think that there still isn't that level of acceptance that breaches are a fact of life. It's not if you've been breached, it's when you've been breached. And that concept for board members still doesn't resonate. And so to a certain extent, it's changing that conversation away from the breach prevention, which is still a very important concept. But unless you're a Sith Lord and you can foresee when a breach is actually going to happen, the best you can do is change that conversation to really talk about risk management to minimize the impacts when a breach does happen.
You mean sort of waving your hand slowly and saying, you will not have a breach? Doesn't work?
No, I've tried it. It doesn't work.
All right, we're taking points privately for the most Star Wars references, so I think we both got 1 and 1 there. So that slide was a draw. Let's do next slide, balance point 3. So again, sort of tracking with the logic. What's the value of security? Is it hard to convey that value? And now we're getting into how do you assess where you stand in terms of security, because we saw that conveying value and offering justification, things like that, are difficult to do. Well, in order to do that, me as a security leader, I need to figure out where we stand in order to present that to the board. I may still not be able to present it well, but just knowing is one thing. So we asked a series of questions around how do you go about doing that? Are you confident with the security program's effectiveness? How do you assess risk posture and set priorities? The confidence one was just fascinating to me. So if you look at the chart on the left, we asked CISOs if they are confident, and most of them said, yeah, I'm pretty confident. 42% were confident. Relatively few of them said they were not confident. On the other hand, you ask board members the same question, and very few of them said they were confident. And when you think about board members, I mean, this is even more important because they basically vote in confidence, out of confidence on pretty much everything. So in their world, the need to have confidence in something is just critically important. It's one of the main parts of what they do. So I thought this was pretty important, and said that there's something deep going on here. And I don't view this as disparaging in any way against security or something like this. It's just kind of the state of affairs. That confidence may not be there because it's not being presented as well. It may not be there because the state of the program actually is not so great. Many reasons, but I think that was an important finding there. And then on the other side, asking security leaders how they go about assessing risk posture and setting priorities. And really, we kind of just, again, asked this very broad question and let them talk, and went back and classified all of their answers into the groups that we could make from those responses. So, as you can imagine, a lot of them using some kind of external standard. Maybe it's NIST, maybe it's ISO, maybe it's FISMA. A lot of them doing risk assessment, and a lot of doing those things in combination, right? These are not mutually exclusive. And it kind of starts dropping off from there. But these are all ways that maybe everybody has experimented with going about and assessing risk posture and setting those priorities. And it's just a good thing, I think, to keep in the background of how this is done. And it's something I'd like to watch over time and see which one of these are gaining or losing ground over time.
And just one other point here, Wade, is when it comes down to that confidence for a corporate director, confidence is really established by delivering what you promise. Board members are used to seeing balance sheets, used to seeing income statements as they relate to a target, a budget, or a forecast or a projection. And I think that the takeaway from this particular slide is that board members lack information that are presented in a way that allows them to determine whether or not we're doing what we're saying we're doing. Because in some senses, they might not have the confidence, but then in other interviews, I believe you've done, board members say that, I think our people are doing a good job, you know, and their only metric for that is, well, I haven't heard about a breach recently, so they must be doing a good job. But if that's the extent of a board's members' level of awareness as it relates to confidence in a security program, then I think we're doing ourselves a disservice as an industry by not being able to say, these are our goals for the security program, and this is how we measure success or failure, and then measure that over time. Indeed.
And if I had to pick a Star Wars quote for this one, I think I would go with Han Solo's refrain of, "I've got a bad feeling about this." That's passable, right? All right. So let's do the next balance point. So this one again flows right from the other. So you've measured your program. You have your security leader. You have some sense of, hey, are we in good shape, and that kind of thing. And then you've got to measure that in some way, right? It's not. Yes, it's important that you have that confidence, and you maybe have reached that yourself, but you gotta have something objective to prove it to someone else. So if you read the report, there's a pretty big list of these things. The larger version of this chart takes up a whole page, and it's pretty cool. It compares things like, hey, what does the board think about system vulnerabilities versus security leaders? What do they think about that as a metric? So kind of if you could expand security topics out to all the things that we asked about, it would include system vulnerabilities and incident response metrics and incidents and events, things of that nature. And if you expand that business topic out, it would be things like business enablement and risk posture and governance info and other things of that nature. So the really interesting thing I think on this board is check out the business one. The blue line are CISOs. You know, again, hey CISO, what's important to you in terms of metrics? And less than 30% of them say something that fell into one of those, a metric that aligns that we would call a business topic. But you ask the board the same question, that dark gray bar, and they're way up almost at 90% of them say, man, I want metrics relevant to the business. These kinds of things are what is really meaningful to me. And that kind of background bar there, the light gray area, is what CISOs are reporting to the board. So it's kind of interesting there. Notice that the CISOs themselves maybe don't find those business metrics as useful to their day-to-day, but they seem to know that the board wants that, and so they're making an effort to report that to a greater degree than they want, which is a good thing, but still falling short of the demand, if you want to look at it like that, from what the board wants. So I think that spells out something important in the way that how do we measure and what do we provide? You know, what's the sort of basics of the language we need to make these two groups find alignment. But metrics is a big thing, and again, one of the building blocks to building up confidence on one hand and justifying that the board should in fact be confident on the other.
You know, I think one of the quotes in the report, Wade, that you had gleaned that I found very telling as it related to this metric was a CISO saying, the board members seem to get more upset when I'm not immediately hopping on a sales call to support a deal.
Yep. Yeah, there were some really good ones throughout the report, and if you haven't read it, I would again urge you to do so. But yeah, especially with with respect to this, one CISO I remember said when they stepped into a job and there was a metrics report that was going on, and they kind of looked at it and said, I don't really know what all of this means, so stop it. But at the same time, I'm not really sure what to replace it with. What do we go out there and measure that's going to be meaningful, not only to me, but to the board? And I will say that I've talked to a couple people since this published, and they say, well, what are you telling me that we should do one or the other, that I should have to collect only metrics that are meaningful to the board? And no. The point is that yes, the CISO may have a set of metrics that's tailored to the operational aspects of the security program, but don't just assume that those are the same things you present up to the board. You might actually have to transform those or get entirely new metrics to present to the board to give them the confidence that they need and let them see what they want to see. And that's the main point. It's not either or. It's probably going to have to do some of both here, because they're flat out different. They're for different managerial purposes, different questions, all of those kinds of things.
Well, and you hit it right there, Wade. It's for different managerial purposes. There are security metrics that you need to have in order to measure the performance of how your people and your technology and your processes are performing. But then you have to roll that up for senior management consumption and for corporate directors. No different than how you roll up sales figures. And so in a sales leaders organization, they might be measuring activities or the number of qualified sales contacts or qualified meetings that they have, whereas the board is going to measure things like, well, what does my weighted pipeline look like? What's the forecast? What does my book-to-bill ratio look like? What's my average deal size? Because they tell two completely different stories. And ultimately, what a board member wants to understand is, are you in control or are you out of control? And if you can present that type of supporting evidence that you're in control, that is continuing, that gives you the ability to continue to earn confidence, which leads to trust.
Yep. And speaking of trust, I think I remember one board member saying that's the number one thing. Security should be providing trust ultimately. So very important concept. All right, let's proceed and hit balance point 5 on one of my favorite topics, measuring and expressing risk. So we talked a little bit about how risk is measured, the use of external standards and risk assessments and maybe maturity models and other things like that. But this is really focusing in on how is it expressed, and this is kind of a hot button issue for some people. And I was very interested personally to learn what we'd find here. So we again asked, how do you measure risk? How do you present it? What does that look like? And if they would share with us what that looks like, send a sanitized report or something. And there's lots of different ways that you could classify that. But what we were really interested in here is kind of these increasing levels of quantification, if you want to view it like this. So starting at the top of that chart, you have purely descriptive, meaning that I basically just describe the state of the organization. We've got a lot of risk in these such and so areas, and it's more of a conversation. Maybe it's a few sentences, but it's descriptive. A lot of people are doing control deficiency. In other words, because I'm not doing this control, or because this gap exists, therefore risk. And yes, there might be risk because the absence of controls, but the absence of a control is not in itself a risk. So this is one of those things where I do think there's some opportunity for improving the way that we do things and maturing our approach to risk assessment and management, of moving beyond just simply, are we 30% of the way toward this standard? Ooh, now we're 60%. So we've reduced our risk in half. That's probably not the case at all. The most common way of expressing risk is in a categorical way. So high, medium, low, red, yellow, green, things like that. And this is very common, because it's a little bit easier. It doesn't lock you into providing a number. But at the same time, there's a little dangerous ground here, because what I view as high, you might not view as high. And without that kind of quantitative side to it, it's, there's the danger of misunderstanding and miscommunication. But nevertheless, a lot of people using that. We didn't really dig into what should be done in this. We mainly wanted to understand what is done. Numerical scores, you can measure it 0 to 10, 0 to 100, one overall score for cyber risk in the organization, or measure it in certain categories. But the point is, you have a score. And then expected losses, some actual value of, hey, here's our risk. This is how much we expect to lose on any given year. And there's probably expressed in the form of a distribution, but that's less than 10% of the time. So the big takeaway here, yes, how risk is expressed is a preference of the board ultimately, but I'm hearing that as the industry matures and as these issues keep cropping up and as breaches are becoming more common, and the board is increasing concern, I think the days of being able to kind of wave your hand and say, yeah, risk is low, it's all good, don't worry about it. Those days are short. And I think kind of going with the theme of the ability to offer justification is going to come in the form of some of those things like expected losses and other measures that, we've measured this. Here's how we express cyber risk in the same way that you express financial risk and lots of other areas of risk. So it looks like it's being handled in the same way as the rest of the organization. A lot of places don't need that now, but I think we're approaching that. I don't know, Yong-Gon, you have any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons categorical is most often used is really, actually it's really for a couple of reasons. One is so that it gives it gives your organization the ability to feel comfortable that you've implemented a comprehensive program, whether it's security policy or vulnerability management or incident management, and all of the different categories therein. Categorical gives you the ability to demonstrate that you've thought about everything that you could be thinking of, which also ties back to that concept of controls. And I think the challenge is that as it relates to the numerical score, building that confidence with a board member really requires a next level of evidence underneath it, because that numerical score gives you an idea of really what the security leader's confidence is in the program, not necessarily how the board member should feel. You're essentially telling them how they should feel. But the other key challenge here is outside of that categorical is, I think that this is where security leaders express a lot of their frustration with board members, because board members are unwilling to admit what they don't know. And as a result, security leaders often feel like they're playing Bring Me a Rock. So they take different points of view and try to identify presentation materials that will resonate. And this is where I think board members can do more for their security organizations by giving them examples of metrics and visualizations and other aspects of business that resonate with them.
Yeah, and there were a lot of CISOs and board members I heard from that one of my favorite quotes in the report from a CISO: hey, when there's a fire, I could calculate exactly how much water is needed to quench the flames, but it's usually better just to dump a bunch of water on it and move on to the next hot spot. Like, and that was in the context of this, kind of saying that, sure, we could go and calculate expected losses and spend a lot of time turning the cranks and figuring that out, but hey, ultimately, my job is to put the fires out, and I don't usually need to do that in order to put the fires out. And I find it hard to argue with that. I get that there's a lot of that going on. If you remember, we got to go back to Star Wars. I'm sorry, folks, but anytime C-3PO started quoting the odds, it often got him shut off. So those were, I'm sure, very precise measurements of risk of dying in an asteroid field or successfully navigating the asteroid field. But a lot of times not ready to hear it, or it's not actionable. What am I going to do with that perfectly derived number? Go to sleep. So another important aspect of it. So let's get the last balance point, 6. This is really dealing with communicating with the board. So the last question was, do you have any tips on communicating with the board? What's worked for you? What hasn't? And again, kind of along with the same thing we've done in the rest of this, we went through and categorized those. And there's 10 different buckets that these fell into, and you're looking at the top 5 here. So the thing I think to notice is that a lot of these are fairly soft. Again, not really having to do with your security background or business acumen, but yes, you need to relate to the business, build security awareness, be credible and candid, tell the truth. Lot of things about that kind of those soft skills and the importance of maintaining presence when you're in the boardroom and just talking to them. You know, they're people. Get to know them. Lot of things like that. So I thought that was pretty important, and again, would encourage you to, if you're struggling there, there's just a wealth of good everyday advice from dozens and dozens of people that have lived through this pain and kind of learned the hard way of how to deal with the board. So with that, I think we can talk a little bit about great. How do we talk to the board? What does a cyber balance sheet look like? All those kind of things. So Yong-Gon, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Wade. Yeah, next slide, please. One of the things that I think is very important is there's that continued concept of relating it back to the business. Cyber balance sheet is really an analogy of being able to make that relate to the business. And so what we came up with is this concept of cyber assets and cyber liabilities, because those are the 2 fundamental categories, in addition to shareholder equity, that's really presented on a financial balance sheet. There needs to be an effective balance of how much I'm investing into a security program to protect my important data assets, and what the exposure to risk actually is from a liability perspective. Next slide. And so be concise and speak the same language. I often use a lot of analogies when I present to boards or to audit committees and things along those lines. For instance, yesterday I was in a board meeting talking a little bit about cyber balance sheet, and the CIO of the organization was talking about implementing spam filtering as a mechanism to prevent phishing attacks. And I just related that back to the board members as, it's like Brita for your email. And it got a bunch of head nods around the room, and that one analogy just made it very relatable to them. A lot of people buy Britas to filter their water, so they understood it, and off you go. Easy way to kind of justify. It's not always that easy though. And so if tell us a story. Start by building confidence in this way by learning how to speak the same language. And then when you move on to walking, begin with a full picture of risk. Security leaders often spend the vast majority of their time talking about mitigation. Things like, we've implemented endpoint protection, whole disk encryption, multi-factor authentication, and all sorts of other types of shuns. And there's very little time spent talking about acceptance and talking about transference of risk. But all 3 are part of that conversation, because just as we saw in one of the quotes earlier on in the presentation, I could feel like I'm doing everything right but could still be exposed to a breach. That's true. It's a fact of life. You got to change that conversation so that you're providing a full picture. And this is one of the elements that often causes a corporate director to lose confidence. Because if all I'm doing is focusing on mitigation, as a board member, I'm still thinking in the back of my mind, sure, yeah, you want me to spend $1 million implementing endpoint protection, but you're not going to stand up here and say, I'm going to guarantee that you're not going to get breached. And that's because that conversation and that point of view hasn't changed. And so talk about, even if you are implementing endpoint protection or you're implementing identity and access management, Talk about what risks you're still accepting. It's not like you're unplugging from the internet. And then talk about where there might actually be exposure that is somewhat in your control and somewhat out of your control, for instance, with third parties. And so the controls themselves aren't always technology. Sometimes they're illegal. And by partnering with other leaders within the business, it gives you that ability to continue to build that trust because you're providing that full picture. And then as it comes to running, being able to build that type of balance between asset and liability, that's the holy grail. That's what everybody would love to be able to do, but the industry isn't there yet. The metrics and the ability to measure security performance hasn't reached the level where I can always put a financial dollar figure with every aspect of an asset or a liability. Next slide. And so this is our notional example that we put in the deck. We didn't fill out these particular examples because this is where we really need your help. What should the categories actually be? Our goal is that as this is an annual process, that we will eventually get to a point where this isn't necessarily a singular voice, that this is really more of a unified voice of the industry that says, this is how we do measure security performance. This is why we feel these are the right metrics, and we can back that up with the right type of data and research. And so if you present this information in this way, it really helps to make sure that you're presenting a complete picture, not just one side of the story that you want to present, because that's important. It's a little bit hard to see here because I think we have it on the next slide, but I want to emphasize the term materiality really means something to board members. So next slide, please. And so, when you think about materiality, board members view their fiduciary responsibility through the lens of materiality. That threshold of materiality is going to vary based on what the risk appetite of an organization is. It's going to vary based on performance year over year, quarter over quarter, and what your budget actually is. But when you say that, when you say that word materiality, a board member can't ignore that, because if they ignore it, by definition, they are neglecting their fiduciary responsibility. So use that word, but use it wisely. We talk about bringing things back to the business. Tell us a story. Use analogies. I often use analogies that a lot of different people can understand. Whether it's things like using sunscreen, the Brita analogy that I used earlier, those sorts of things, they really help. Measure things in relation to time, and then demonstrate progress. Demonstrate where you're getting better and where you're getting worse, and make sure that that's a transparent. Make sure that that's a transparent conversation, because if all you ever present is that we're getting better in every category, how can we truly appreciate that and have confidence that really is the case? And the last point there, ask your board members what they've seen elsewhere and what they'd like to see from you. Have that discussion and extend that type of olive branch, and it'll be very interesting what you can learn through that type of conversation.
All right, we've got 10 minutes left of the webinar. We're at the point where we'd like to answer some questions. Before we do that, I will point out that if you're interested in contributing to next year's report, either as an interview subject or helping with the research, we've set up the email contribute@cyberbalancesheet.com. Feel free to send us a note, let us know how you'd like to get involved, and we'll make sure to include you in next year's report. We don't have any questions in the GoToWebinar panel currently, but we do have some that came in through social that I'd like to walk through if you guys have time to answer them. So let's throw them up. I'll let Wade, Yong-Gon, I'll let you handle who wants to take which one, but I think there's some interesting questions here.
Yeah, so I'll take the first one there in terms of any tips for justifying security spending without resorting to scare tactics. We talked a lot um, about the concept of making it relatable to the business. It's a key theme that we repeat over and over and again. Part of what makes this difficult is being able to prove a not negative, and being able to justify spends usually means that you kind of have to put yourself out on a limb and say, I want to implement the following data loss prevention program. And being able to justify that really comes down to building a business case. That's how corporate directors and C-level executives look at justifying security spending. So what are the key elements of a business case? The key elements of a business case includes a problem statement, a request for investment, the value of that request for investment, and then what the payback period actually is. And so if you want to be able to justify that security spend, you have to be able to throw some goals out there and say, this is what we expect to A, learn, B, be able to prevent, or C, being able to visualize and have better situational awareness. That's a really important factor, is using that kind of business case construct for justifying your security spend will give you a better ability to relate to a board member. Wade?
So I'll take the next one. What do we get the board to see? How do we get the board to see the security program as more than a cost center? I think a lot of that aligns with what was mentioned there. There are quite a few tips that I got along these lines that I would fit into. Once you do the job of securing the business and you've measured that and you've kind of communicated those basic data points, how can you kind of start moving toward business enablement? And I think this is an important thing we'd like to look at a little bit more in the future. But things as easy as reaching out to other business units and seeing how you can help. In some organizations, security has this reputation of being the no center. Hey, we want to do this. Nope, 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 nope. Hand slaps, that kind of stuff. And yes, sometimes security needs to provide that kind of guidance. I don't think we should say no, usually ever. I think there's always a way to get to yes. It may be prohibitively expensive, but even laying that out is your job. But so reaching out, hey, how can I help you? What do you need? Ways to present security as having some easy wins. That's one of the things that I often recommend is, find one thing that you can demonstrate risk was reduced to the business and they didn't have to spend any extra money, and talk about that next time, even if you just spend a couple minutes on it. But, it builds up a sense of, all right, man, we don't have to pay frightening amounts of money every time we want to get security to do something. So I think there's lots of little techniques like that can be used to see that security is in this with the rest of the organization, and we're all trying to get to one place. Not saying no and having that being the stopper. You'll often yes, but and so on and so forth.
And I'll take the next one there. How is it possible that CISOs are so much more confident in their programs than directors are? Lack of trust. It is. You could say it's lack of trust, but I don't necessarily think that it's lack of trust. I think that it's lack of the right alignment and communication, and that really stems from speaking the language of business. And so you develop that trust by saying what you meaning what you say, and you deliver what you promise, and by doing that, that helps build confidence. How you build trust. And so, as security leaders, one of the most important fundamental things to understand is how does your organization, if you're in the commercial sector, how does your organization make money? Or what is the mission of your organization? Let's say if you're a government entity or nonprofit, and then many organizations have strategic plans that define what the mission and the objectives are, and build your security strategic plan that ties directly to those objectives, and then build goals on an annual or quarterly or whatever the frequency makes sense. Build your goals in such a way that ties directly back to that, so it can tie directly to the business itself. And then based on those goals, be able to demonstrate over and over again that you're using the business language instead of jargon. Data exfiltration, as we've seen in Star Wars Rogue One, happened a long, long time ago via SATCOM. But when did data exfiltration become data exfiltration? Well, it's a term that the industry invented. It leads towards the drama and the media attention, but when in actuality it really is just theft. And I think that it's important to be able to simplify those terms, because board members are last in, first out processors often. And as last in, first out processors, you have to be able to present information in a simple context. Don't take them for fools, because they're very smart, or they can be very smart, but use terms that that gives you the ability to take credit for the work that you're doing, but then also put yourself out there to say, this is what I'm going to be doing next, and then deliver what you promise.
On the next one, does anybody currently use a cyber balance sheet? Are there any examples? So during the background research for this, went through the existing reports and other research that touched on this general topic. Didn't see any mention in there. I did see some general mentions of a cyber balance sheet-ish concept. But I have to say, I have not seen such a thing in an actual organization. I don't know, Yong-Gon, have you?
I have not either. I do know that the insurance industry is really leading the way as it relates to having these types of conversations, because the analogy is very much relatable, and as cyber insurance is a very hot topic these days, trying to figure out how to empirically measure security performance will help their ability to predict risk factors, insurance premiums, and coverage umbrellas in the future.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. Great answers. We're right here at the hour, so we're going to go ahead and end the webinar. We'd like to thank everybody who attended, thank those who chipped in questions in advance, thank our sponsors, Focal Point and Scientia. I'd encourage you, if you haven't read the report, to go grab a copy and keep up with next year's report by following the Cyber Balance Sheet accounts on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.
It's 3 o'clock.